The woman's hands trembled as she pressed them against the cowboy's chest, pushing him back toward the cottonwood trees lining the riverbank. Her turquoise necklaces caught the fading light, clinking softly as she moved. "If they find out, we're dead," she whispered, her dark eyes scanning the hills behind them. He didn't let go of her waist. Dust hung in the air between them, particles suspended like they had all the time in the world. But the tracks in the sand told a different story. Fresh hoofprints circling the area, coming close but never quite reaching this hidden bend in the river. Someone had been looking. Someone was always looking. Yet here she was again, her traditional buckskin dress with its leather fringes pressed against his worn work shirt, her braided hair falling over his shoulder as she leaned closer despite her own warning. Nora Talbot had been meeting Royce Barrett at this river for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since he'd found her gathering medicinal plants on the boundary between Apache land and the open range where he worked cattle. 3 weeks since she'd looked into his face and seen something she wasn't supposed to see. A man who didn't look at her with fear or hatred or the blank calculation most settlers carried in their eyes. Her father, Gideon Nash, ruled their tribe with the iron will of a man who'd buried too many people. Her brother Thorn watched her movements like a hawk watches a rabbit. The tribal council had clear laws about outsiders. Death wasn't a metaphor. It was a promise. But Royce kept coming back to the river, and Nora kept letting him. She could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, steady and strong despite the danger. He smelled like leather and dust, and something else she couldn't name. Something that made her want to stay even when every instinct screamed at her to run. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her fingers curled into the fabric at his shoulders, contradicting her words. The river moved past them, indifferent to the risk they were taking. Across the water, Apache territory stretched into the hills. Behind them, open range rolled toward the distant ranches where men like Royce worked from sunrise to dark. He lifted his hand slowly, carefully, and touched the turquoise beads at her throat. His fingers were calloused and gentle at the same time. "Neither should you." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Your people would kill you for this. Yours would do worse." She didn't pull away. The truth sat between them like a third presence. Her mother had died in a raid 5 years ago. Settlers burning Apache camps, taking what they wanted, leaving bodies behind. Royce's father had been killed defending a native family from other cowboys. Both of them carried scars that should have made this impossible. Instead, it made them understand each other in a way no one else could. The question wasn't why they kept meeting. The question was how long they could survive it. Royce's thumb traced the edge of her jaw. She closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to pretend the world was different. When she opened them again, he was staring past her shoulder toward the hills. His expression changed. The tenderness vanished, replaced by something sharp and alert. "Nora." His hand tightened on her waist. "Don't move. Don't turn around." She heard it then, the sound that made her blood turn cold. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses. Coming fast. Nora pulled away from Royce and dropped to her knees behind the cottonwood trunk in one fluid motion. He followed, pressing his back against the rough bark beside her. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by voices calling out in Apache. Her brother's voice. Thorn was leading the search party. She could hear him shouting orders to the other warriors, telling them to spread out along the riverbank. They were looking for tracks, looking for signs of intrusion, looking for proof that someone had violated the boundary. Royce's horse was hidden a half-mile away in a rocky outcrop, but his boot prints were everywhere around this tree. Her own footprints mixed with his in the sand. Anyone with eyes could read what had happened here. "Can you swim?" Royce whispered against her ear. The river was 20 feet away, moving fast over smooth stones. Cold water from the mountains, deep enough to carry them downstream if they could reach it without being seen. But the banks were open, no cover. Thorn's party was between them and the water now. She shook her head. They were trapped. Through the leaves, Nora watched her brother dismount and walk slowly along the riverbank. He moved like their father had taught him, reading the ground, seeing everything. 4 other warriors stayed mounted, forming a loose perimeter. Thorn crouched near a patch of disturbed sand and ran his fingers through it. His jaw tightened. He'd found something. She knew that look. He stood and turned toward the cottonwood grove, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Royce's breathing was controlled, steady. He'd pulled his revolver from its holster without making a sound. Nora put her hand on his wrist and squeezed once. No. If he fired that weapon, they were both dead. If Thorn found them together, they were both dead. But if she could convince her brother she'd been alone, gathering plants like she'd claimed, maybe Royce could slip away while she created a distraction. It was the only chance. She stood up before Royce could stop her, walked out from behind the tree into clear sight of the mounted warriors. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face calm. Empty. She carried a small leather pouch at her waist for collecting herbs. She opened it now and pretended to examine the contents, as if she'd been doing nothing more dangerous than her usual gathering. Thorn's head snapped up, his eyes locked on her. The warriors shifted in their saddles, hands moving to weapons. "Sister?" Thorn's voice carried across the distance between them. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded disappointed. Worse than disappointed. He sounded like a man confirming something he'd hoped wasn't true. "You're far from the camp. The best plants grow near the river." She kept her voice steady. "Casual. You know that." He walked toward her slowly, scanning the ground with every step. She didn't dare look back at the cottonwood where Royce was hidden. Didn't dare give away his position. Thorn stopped 10 feet away from her, close enough that she could see the suspicion written across his face. "Alone? Do you see anyone else?" His eyes moved past her to the cottonwood grove, to the disturbed sand, to the clear evidence that someone had been standing there recently. Someone heavier than his sister. Someone wearing boots instead of the soft leather moccasins Apache women preferred. He took another step forward. Then another. Nora's breath caught in her throat. If he walked around that tree and found Royce crouched there with a revolver in his hand, this would end in blood. "Father wants you home before dark," Thorn said finally. But he didn't move away, didn't stop staring at the cottonwood. "There's a council meeting tonight, about the settlers expanding their range." His gaze came back to her face, "about how we respond to trespassers." The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Trespassers. He knew. Maybe he didn't have proof, but he knew. And if he told their father, Gideon Nash would send warriors to hunt every inch of this boundary until they found what she was hiding. Who she was hiding. One of the mounted warriors called out from downstream. He'd found something. Fresh hoof prints heading away from the river toward the open range. Royce's horse. Thorn's attention shifted immediately. He looked at Nora one more time, his expression unreadable, then walked back toward his mount. "Go home, sister. Now, before someone else finds you out here asking questions I can't answer for you." He swung onto his horse and led the warriors downstream, following the tracks. Nora stood frozen until the hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did she turn back to the cottonwood. Royce stepped out from behind the trunk, his revolver still in his hand. His face was pale. "That was your brother." "Yes, he knows." "Not yet, but he will." She moved closer to him, knowing this might be the last time. "They're going to find your horse. They'll track you back to whatever ranch you work. And then they'll know a cowboy has been crossing onto Apache land." She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart racing now. "You can't come back here, Royce. This was the last time." He caught her wrist, held it. "No, they'll kill you." "Then let them try." His eyes were fierce, determined. "I'm not giving you up because they're afraid of something that doesn't have to be this way." He pulled her closer. "Meet me tomorrow, same time. There's a canyon 3 miles north of here where the river narrows. No one patrols that far. We'll be safe there. Royce." "Tomorrow, Nora." He kissed her forehead once, quickly, then released her and moved toward the river. He waded in without hesitation, letting the current take him downstream away from the direction Thorn had ridden. She watched until he disappeared around the bend. Then she turned and walked back toward her camp, knowing she'd just made a choice she couldn't take back. Tomorrow she would meet him again. Tomorrow they would both be one step closer to the consequence her brother had warned about. But for tonight, she had to face her father and pretend everything was still the way it had always been. The sun was setting when she reached the edge of camp. Cook fires were already burning. Women moved between the tents preparing the evening meal. Children ran past her chasing each other with sticks. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the world wasn't about to crack open beneath her feet. Gideon Nash stood outside the largest tent, arms crossed, watching her approach. Even from a distance she could see the question in his eyes. Gideon Nash didn't speak until Nora was standing directly in front of him. The other women in camp had gone quiet, pretending not to watch but hearing everything. Her father's silence was worse than shouting. He had a way of making you confess without asking a single question. She kept her eyes level with his, refusing to look away first. That would be admitting guilt. "Your brother found tracks by the river," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled. Settler tracks, boot prints, a horse tied up in the rocks. He took a step closer. You were gathering plants in that exact area. Did you see anyone? The lie came easier than it should have. No. I heard horses and hid until they passed. She lifted her leather pouch. I found what I needed and came back. His eyes searched her face for a long moment. She'd been lying to this man her entire life about small things. Broken tools, missed chores, midnight conversations with friends. But this wasn't small. This was the kind of lie that could get people killed. He seemed to know it. The council meets in 1 hour, he said. You will attend. That was unusual. Women rarely attended council meetings unless they were elders or had specific grievances to present. Nora nodded slowly. Why? Because we're deciding how to handle the settler problem, and I want you to understand what's at stake. He turned away from her, then paused. Your mother believed there could be peace between our people and theirs. She was wrong. That belief killed her. I won't lose my daughter to the same foolish hope. The words hit harder than a slap. Nora's mother, Eileen, had died 5 years ago when a group of drunk settlers attacked an Apache camp, mistaking it for a hostile war party. They'd burned tents, killed 3 women, wounded a dozen others before fleeing. Eileen had been trying to negotiate to explain they were peaceful when a bullet found her chest. Gideon had carried her body back himself. He'd never spoken of peace again. Inside their tent, Nora changed from her river-damp dress into clean buckskin and rebraided her hair with trembling fingers. She could still feel Royce's hands on her waist, still hear his voice saying he wouldn't give her up. But what choice did they have? If her father discovered the truth, he would send warriors to kill Royce. If Royce's people discovered him meeting an Apache woman, they would likely do the same. Both sides had been killing each other for so long that trust was a language no one remembered how to speak. The council fire was burning bright when she emerged. 15 men sat in a circle around it. Warriors, hunters, respected elders. Thorn was there, his face unreadable. Gideon gestured for Nora to sit behind him, outside the circle but close enough to hear everything. The discussion began immediately. An elder named Tobias spoke first. The settlers grow bolder. They push their cattle onto our land. They hunt our game. They build fences across paths our ancestors walked for generations. He looked around the circle. If we do nothing, they will take everything. Another warrior, younger and angrier, stood up. We should raid their ranches, burn their barns, show them what happens when they ignore boundaries, make them afraid to cross into our territory. Several men nodded in agreement. Gideon raised his hand for silence. Fear is a temporary deterrent. It invites retaliation. We've seen this before. 1 raid becomes 2. 2 becomes a war that never ends. He paused, letting his words settle. But neither can we appear weak. If they believe we won't defend our land, they'll take it piece by piece until we have nothing left. Thorn stood. Nora's breath caught. Her brother looked directly at their father when he spoke. There's another problem. I found evidence today that someone has been crossing our boundary regularly. A rider, coming to the same spot by the river multiple times over recent weeks. His eyes flickered briefly to Nora, then away. Meeting someone. The circle went silent. Every man there understood the implication. A settler meeting an Apache in secret could only mean one thing: collaboration or romance. Both were considered betrayal. Gideon's jaw tightened. Did you find this person? No, but I will. Thorn sat back down. The weight of his promise hung over the fire like smoke. Another elder spoke up. If there's a traitor among us helping settlers scout our land, we need to find them quickly, before they sell us out completely. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. Plans were made. Patrols would be doubled. Anyone seen near the boundary would be questioned. Warriors would take shifts watching the river both day and night. Nora sat perfectly still, barely breathing. They were building a trap, and tomorrow she was planning to walk straight into it. She should stay away from the canyon, should break off contact with Royce before this went any further. That was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that would keep them both alive. But when the council meeting ended and she walked back to her tent under a sky full of stars, she knew she wouldn't make that choice. She would go to the canyon tomorrow. She would see Royce one more time, even if it meant risking everything. Because the truth was simpler and more complicated than her father could understand. She wasn't meeting Royce to betray her people. She was meeting him because for the first time in her life, someone looked at her and saw Nora. Not just the chief's daughter. Not just an Apache. Not just a woman bound by rules written before she was born. She lay down in her tent that night and tried to sleep, but every sound outside made her heart race. Footsteps passing by. Voices in the distance. The crackle of dying fires. Somewhere in the darkness, Thorne was probably planning his next patrol. Somewhere beyond the boundary, Royce was probably thinking about tomorrow. And somewhere in between, a choice was forming that neither of them could avoid much longer. By tomorrow night, everything would change. She just didn't know yet whether that change would set them free or destroy them both. The last thing she thought before sleep took her was simple and terrifying. If they find out we're dead, but she was going anyway. Nora left camp just after dawn when the morning mist still clung to the ground. She told the women at the cook fire she was checking trap lines to the north. They nodded without much interest. She walked until she was out of sight, then ran. 3 miles to the canyon where the river narrowed between high rock walls. 3 miles of exposed ground where anyone watching from the hills could spot her. But the camp was quiet. Most of the men were still sleeping after staying up late at the council fire. She had maybe 2 hours before Thorne organized the new patrols. The canyon entrance was hidden behind a cluster of juniper trees. She slipped between the rocks and followed the sound of rushing water. The river here was fast and loud, drowning out other sounds. That was good, but it also meant she wouldn't hear anyone approaching. That was dangerous. She moved carefully, watching for footprints, for broken branches, for any sign that someone else had found this place. Royce was already there. He stood at the edge of the water with his back to her, his hat pushed back on his head. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she almost stumbled. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides. His arms went around her waist and he lifted her off the ground, pressing his face against her neck. She could feel him breathing, could feel the tension in his shoulders releasing now that she was here. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said against her skin. "I almost didn't." She pulled back enough to see his face. There was a bruise on his jaw that hadn't been there yesterday. "What happened?" "Ran into some of your brother's warriors last night. They were checking the ranches, asking questions about who'd been riding near Apache land." He set her down, but kept his hands on her waist. "I convinced them I'd been nowhere near the boundary, but it won't take them long to figure out I'm lying." Nora traced the bruise with her fingertips. "They hit you. Not as hard as they wanted to." He caught her hand and held it. "Nora, we need to talk about what happens next. This isn't sustainable. Eventually someone's going to catch us. And when they do, I know." She pulled away from him and walked to the edge of the water. The current was strong here, white foam churning over rocks. "My father doubled the patrols. Thorne is leading them personally. They're looking for whoever's been crossing the boundary." She turned back to face him. "They're looking for you." Royce was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come with me." "What?" "Leave. Tonight. I have money saved. We could go north, find a place where no one knows either of us. Start over." He moved toward her. "I know it sounds impossible, but staying here is what's impossible. You said it yourself. If they find out, we're dead. So let's make sure they don't find out. Let's just go." The offer hung in the air between them like something fragile and dangerous. Leave her father. Leave Thorne. Leave the only life she'd ever known. Become an exile. A woman without a tribe. Forever marked as a traitor to her people. It should have been an easy choice to refuse. But standing there looking at Royce, she realized part of her had already been considering it. Already been imagining what it would feel like to stop hiding. To stop lying. To stop being afraid every time they touched. "I can't," she said finally. "My father, he's difficult, but he's not cruel. If I disappeared without explanation, it would destroy him. He's already lost my mother. I can't do that to him." "Then tell him the truth. The truth would get you killed, and me locked away for the rest of my life." She shook her head. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." Royce's voice was gentle but firm. "I've thought about this from every angle. Our people have been killing each other for years. They're not going to suddenly decide it's fine for us to be together just because we ask nicely." He took her hands in his. "The only way this ends without blood is if we remove ourselves from the equation. Disappear before anyone can stop us." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to believe there was some path forward that didn't require abandoning everything. But deep down, she knew he was right. The hatred ran too deep. The scars were too fresh. Her father would never accept a settler. The ranchers would never accept an Apache. They were caught between two worlds that couldn't overlap without violence. She stepped closer to him, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his body in the cool morning air. His hands moved from hers to her waist, then up her back, pulling her against him. She tilted her face up, and their mouths met in a kiss that tasted like desperation and decision. His fingers tangled in her braids. Her hands gripped his shirt. The river rushed past them, oblivious to the choice being made on its banks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Royce pressed his forehead against hers. "So is that a yes?" Before she could answer, a sound cut through the noise of the water. Voices, multiple voices echoing off the canyon walls, shouting in Apache. Royce's eyes went wide. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a narrow gap between two boulders. They squeezed into the space just as four warriors on horseback appeared at the canyon entrance. Thorn was leading them. Her brother rode slowly along the riverbank, scanning the ground. The other warriors spread out, checking behind rocks and trees. One of them spotted Royce's horse tied up 50 yards downstream. He called out and pointed. Thorn dismounted and walked toward the animal, his hand on his knife. Nora's heart hammered so hard she was certain they could hear it. The gap between the boulders was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. Royce's body was pressed tight against hers, both of them frozen, barely breathing. Thorn examined Royce's horse carefully, ran his hand along the saddle, checked the saddlebags. Then he looked up and scanned the canyon, his gaze moving slowly across every shadow and crevice. For one terrible moment, his eyes seemed to land directly on their hiding spot. Nora stopped breathing entirely, but then one of the other warriors called out from upstream. He'd found footprints, fresh ones, leading away from the water toward the high ground. Thorn mounted his horse and led the group upstream, following the false trail. Within minutes, they'd disappeared around a bend in the canyon. Nora and Royce stayed motionless for another full minute, making sure they were really gone. Then Royce grabbed her face in both hands and kissed her hard, quick, like sealing a promise. "Tonight," he said, "meet me at the river where we first met. Midnight. Bring whatever you can carry. We're leaving." She nodded. There was no other choice now. Thorn was getting too close. The patrols were everywhere. It was only a matter of time before they ran out of luck. Tonight she would leave everything behind. Tonight they would run. And tomorrow they would either be free or they would be dead. But at least they would be together. Royce slipped out of the gap first, moving low and fast toward his horse. He untied the animal and swung into the saddle without looking back. Nora watched him ride out of the canyon at a gallop, then waited another 10 minutes before emerging herself. The walk back to camp felt longer than the walk out. Every step was another step closer to the moment when her old life would end, and something new and terrifying would begin. By the time she reached the edge of camp, the sun was high overhead. Thorn's horse was tied outside their father's tent, and standing beside it, arms crossed, expression cold as winter, was Gideon Nash, waiting for her. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 10 a.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter. Because out here in the West, no one waits around. Gideon Nash didn't say a word as Nora approached. He just watched her with eyes that had already judged and found guilty. Thorn stood beside him, his face carefully blank. Other people in camp had stopped their work to watch. News traveled fast in a place this small. Whatever was about to happen, everyone would know about it within the hour. Inside, her father's voice was quiet. That was worse than yelling. He turned and walked into the tent. Thorn gestured for her to follow. She did, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. The tent was dim after the bright sunlight outside. It smelled like leather and sage smoke. Gideon stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. "Thorn found something interesting today," he said without turning around. "A cowboy's horse tied up in the northern canyon, the same canyon you claimed to be checking trap lines near." Now he turned. His face was carved from stone. He also found tracks, yours and someone else's. Close together, too close. He took a step toward her. "So I'm going to ask you one time, and I want the truth. Have you been meeting a settler?" The lie died in her throat. She could see in his eyes that he already knew. Denying it would only make things worse. "Yes." The word seemed to suck all the air out of the tent. Thorn closed his eyes briefly. Gideon's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "How long?" "A month." A month. He repeated the words like they were in a language he didn't understand. For a month, you've been sneaking off to meet with one of the people who killed your mother, who have been pushing us off our land piece by piece, who would slaughter every one of us if they thought they could get away with it. His voice rose with each sentence. And you thought that was acceptable? He's not like them. They're all like them. The shout came out of nowhere, violent and sudden. Gideon grabbed her shoulders. Your mother thought she could find common ground with settlers. She believed in their better nature. And where did that belief get her? In the ground with a bullet in her chest. He released her and turned away, breathing hard. I will not lose my daughter the same way. You're not going to lose me. I already have. His voice dropped back to that quiet, terrible tone. The daughter I raised would never betray her people like this, would never put her own desires above the safety of everyone in this camp. He looked at Thorn. Find him. Bring him here alive if you can. Dead if you can't. Thorn nodded and left the tent immediately. Nora started after him, but Gideon caught her arm. You're not going anywhere. From now until I decide otherwise, you stay in this tent. You speak to no one. You go nowhere. He called out and 2 women entered. Elders, respected members of the tribe. She is confined. If she tries to leave, you will stop her. Understood? They nodded. Nora pulled her arm free from her father's grip. What are you going to do to him? That depends on whether he comes willingly or fights. Gideon walked to the tent entrance and paused there. If he cares about you at all, he'll run. He'll get as far from Apache land as his horse can carry him. Because if my son finds him, there won't be a trial. There won't be a discussion. There will just be consequences. He left without looking back. The 2 women positioned themselves on either side of the tent entrance. Guards. Nora sank down onto a pile of blankets and tried to think. Royce didn't know they'd been discovered. He was planning to meet her at midnight by the river. He would ride right into a trap. She had to warn him, had to find some way to get word to him before Thorn's warriors reached the boundary. But how? She was confined. Watched. The elders weren't going to let her slip past them. Hours crawled by. Outside, she could hear the camp preparing for something. Men gathering weapons, horses being saddled, voices calling out instructions. Thorn was organizing a hunting party, not for game, for Royce. The sun moved slowly across the sky. Afternoon turned to evening. The elders brought her food but didn't speak. They just watched her with a mixture of pity and disappointment that made her want to scream. As darkness fell, Nora heard horses leaving camp. At least a dozen riders by the sound of it. They were heading to the boundary to set up an ambush. Royce would ride to the river at midnight expecting to find her. Instead, he would find warriors waiting to kill him. She stood up and paced the small space of the tent. There had to be a way out. Had to be something she could do. But the elders were alert, watching her every movement. And even if she somehow got past them, she was on foot. The warriors were mounted and had a head start. She would never reach Royce in time, unless she didn't have to reach him, unless there was another way to warn him. Nora moved to the back corner of the tent where her belongings were stored. She pretended to arrange blankets while her mind raced through possibilities. The camp sat on a slight rise above the river valley. From the highest point, you could see for miles. There were still a few people moving around outside, women banking cook fires, children being called in for the night. In the confusion and darkness, if she was fast and clever, she might be able to reach the high ground. And from there, she could light a signal fire. Something bright enough that Royce would see it from the boundary. A warning to stay away. It was a desperate plan. Probably wouldn't work. But it was the only plan she had. She waited until the camp quieted, until she heard the elders breathing slow and steady. One of them had dozed off. The other was fighting to stay awake, her head nodding forward, then jerking back up. Nora moved slowly, carefully to the back wall of the tent. The hide was old in places, worn thin by weather and time. She found a seam that had been repaired multiple times and worked her fingers into it. The stitching gave way with barely a sound. She widened the gap inch by inch until it was large enough to squeeze through. The elder who was still awake shifted position. Nora froze. But the woman didn't turn around, didn't notice the movement. Nora slipped through the opening and into the darkness outside. She stayed low, moving between tents toward the high ground. Dogs barked in the distance, but not at her. A baby cried and was quickly soothed. Normal night sounds. Nothing suspicious. She reached the edge of camp and started climbing. The high point was a rocky outcrop that took 10 minutes of hard scrambling to reach. By the time she got there, her hands were bleeding and her lungs burned, but she could see the entire valley spread out below. The river was a dark ribbon cutting through lighter ground, and far in the distance, near the boundary, she could see the faint glow of a campfire. Thorne's ambush party. They were already in position. Nora gathered dry brush and stacked it in the center of the outcrop. She pulled out the fire-starting kit she'd grabbed from the tent, flint and steel, char cloth. Her hands shook as she struck sparks, once, twice, 3 times. The char cloth caught. She blew on it gently, coaxing it to life, then transferred it to the brush. Flames leaped up, bright and sudden in the darkness. She fed the fire, making it bigger, hotter, impossible to miss. Below her the camp stirred. Voices called out in alarm. People emerged from tents to see what was burning. And somewhere in the distance, she prayed Royce was watching too, that he would see the fire and understand, that he would turn his horse around and ride away while he still could. Because at midnight, when he didn't show up at the river, Thorne would know she'd warned him, and then there would be no escape for either of them. Warriors reached the outcrop within minutes. Nora didn't run. There was nowhere to go. She stood beside the fire she'd built and watched them climb toward her. Thorne arrived first, his face twisted with rage and something that looked like betrayal. Behind him came 4 other men, all of them armed. They surrounded her in a loose circle. "Put out that fire," Thorne said. His voice was shaking. "Now." Nora kicked sand over the flames until only smoke remained. The damage was already done. Anyone watching from the boundary would have seen it, would have understood. Thorne grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise and pulled her toward the path down. "You just killed him. You understand that? When he doesn't show up tonight, Father will know you warned him, and then there will be no mercy for either of you." They dragged her back to camp and threw her into her father's tent. Gideon was waiting, his expression carved from granite. He dismissed the other warriors with a gesture, leaving only himself and Thorne inside. The silence stretched until Nora thought she might scream just to break it. Finally, her father spoke. "I gave you a chance to prove your loyalty, to show that you were still my daughter, still Apache." He stepped closer. "Instead, you lit a warning fire that every person in this valley could see. You chose him over your people, over your family, over me." His voice cracked on the last word. For a moment, he looked less like a chief and more like a father watching his child walk away. Then the mask came back. "Thorne, take her to the holding tent. Post guards. She doesn't speak to anyone. She doesn't leave. Not until this is finished." "What are you going to do?" Nora asked. "What I should have done the moment I learned about this. I'm going to send riders to every ranch within 50 miles. I'm going to describe this cowboy, his horse, his height, that scar on his jaw, and I'm going to offer a reward to anyone who brings him to me." Gideon's eyes were cold. "If you warned him and he runs, we'll find him eventually. If you warned him and he's foolish enough to come for you, he'll ride straight into our hands. Either way, this ends." They locked her in a smaller tent at the edge of camp. 2 warriors stood outside the entrance. Through the hide walls, she could hear the camp organizing, horses being prepared, riders leaving in groups, spreading out to search. Her father was serious. He would hunt Royce across the entire territory if necessary, and if the ranchers found out there was a reward for capturing him, they would help. Everyone wanted to prove their loyalty to one side or the other. No one wanted to be caught in the middle. Nora lay on the hard ground and tried to think. Royce had seen the fire. She was certain of it. The signal had been bright, impossible to miss. So now he had a choice. Run and save himself, or come back for her and die trying. The smart choice was obvious. The choice she desperately wanted him to make was the opposite. She hated herself for that wanting. Hated that part of her hoped he would be reckless enough to try a rescue. Because if he did, she would lose him. And if he didn't, she would lose him anyway. Hours passed. The camp grew quiet as night deepened. Nora dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. Somewhere past midnight, she heard horses returning, voices outside her tent. Then silence again. No shouting, no celebration. They hadn't found him. Not yet. She allowed herself a small breath of relief. Maybe he'd been smart. Maybe he'd run. Dawn came gray and cold. The guards brought her water, but no food. Punishment or oversight, she couldn't tell. Through the tent walls, she heard Thorne giving orders to a fresh group of riders. They were expanding the search, checking places farther from the boundary, places where a man might hide if he were watching and waiting. Her brother's voice was determined, relentless. He wouldn't stop until this was resolved. Around midday, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting, running footsteps. Someone yelling for Gideon. Nora's heart stopped. They'd found him. They'd caught Royce, and now they were bringing him to camp. She pressed her ear to the tent wall, trying to hear, but the voices were too jumbled, too excited. Then her father's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Bring him to the center. Everyone gather. I want witnesses." The guards pulled Nora from her tent. She struggled, but they were stronger, dragging her toward the camp center where a crowd was forming. Her eyes searched desperately for Royce, for his familiar shape, for confirmation of her worst fear. But the man the warriors had captured wasn't Royce. It was someone else, a ranch hand she'd never seen before, bleeding from a split lip, hands bound behind his back. Gideon stood over him. "Tell them what you told me," her father said. The ranch hand spat blood into the dirt. "The cowboy you're looking for, Royce Barrett. He left." Nora's knees almost gave out. Left. He'd seen the signal and run. He was safe. The relief was so powerful she felt dizzy. But then the ranch hand continued. "Left 3 hours ago with supplies for a week. Told the foreman he had personal business to handle." The man looked up at Gideon with fear in his eyes. "Said he'd be back when it was done. Whatever that means." The camp went silent. Thorne turned slowly to look at Nora. Understanding dawned on his face. He's not running. He's coming for her. Gideon's expression shifted from anger to something more dangerous. Calculation. How many men does he have with him? None. He went alone. One man. Her father smiled without humor. One fool coming to take my daughter from her people, from her home, from everything she's ever known. He raised his voice so the entire camp could hear. "Let him come. We'll be ready. And when he arrives, he'll learn what happens to settlers who think they can take what belongs to Apache." He turned to Thorne. "Double the perimeter guards. Set watchers on every approach to camp. I want to know the moment he gets within a mile of here." His gaze found Nora in the crowd. "And bring her. Put her somewhere visible. Somewhere he'll see her when he comes. She'll be our bait." They dragged Nora to the center of camp and tied her hands to a post near the main fire pit. Not tight enough to hurt, but secure enough that she couldn't escape. Around her, warriors took positions with rifles and bows. The trap was set. All they needed now was for Royce to walk into it. She pulled against the ropes, accomplishing nothing. Her father stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the tree line, waiting. "You don't have to do this," Nora said. "He's just one man. Let him go. Let us both go. We'll leave and never come back." "No." Gideon didn't look at her. "This is about more than you now. It's about showing every person in this camp that our laws matter, that our boundaries matter, that we don't surrender our daughters to outsiders no matter how they ask." Finally, he turned to face her. "You made your choice when you lit that fire. Now you get to live with the consequences." The sun moved slowly across the sky. Afternoon became evening. The warriors stayed alert, watching, waiting. And somewhere in the hills beyond the camp, Royce was coming. Nora could feel it like a weight pressing down on her chest. He was riding toward them because he believed he could save her, because he didn't understand that some things couldn't be saved, only survived or lost. By the time the sun touched the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp, she knew it was almost over. One way or another, tonight would decide everything. The warning came just after sunset. A scout rode in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. Rider approaching from the east, alone, moving slow. He looked at Gideon. He's not trying to hide. He's riding straight toward us. The camp tensed like a bowstring pulled tight. Warriors moved into position. Gideon stood beside Nora, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "No one shoots unless I give the order. I want him alive. I want him to see what he's cost my daughter before we decide his fate." His eyes were hard. "And I want every settler who hears this story to understand what happens when they cross Apache land with Apache business." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream at Royce to turn around, to ride away while he still could. But even if she could shout loud enough, he wouldn't listen. She knew that now. He was coming because he'd made her the same promise she'd made him, that they would rather die together than live apart. At the time, it had sounded romantic. Now it just sounded like the truth. Royce appeared at the edge of the firelight, riding slow and steady. His hands were raised, showing he wasn't reaching for his weapon, But Nora could see the revolver on his hip, could see the rifle in the saddle holster. He wasn't unarmed, just controlled. He rode into the center of camp and stopped 20 feet from where Gideon stood. His eyes found Nora immediately. She saw relief flash across his face when he confirmed she was alive. Then he looked at her father. "I'm here for Nora Talbot." His voice carried across the silent camp. "I'm asking permission to take her with me. We'll leave peacefully. You'll never see either of us again." Gideon laughed. It was a cold sound without humor. "You ride into my camp alone, surrounded by 40 warriors who would kill you with a word from me. And you think you're in a position to ask for anything?" He took a step forward. "Tell me why I shouldn't execute you right now for trespassing, for corrupting my daughter, for violating sacred boundaries. Because she loves me." Royce's gaze never wavered. "And because killing me won't change that. It'll just make her hate you for the rest of her life. She's young. She'll recover." But something flickered in Gideon's expression. Doubt, maybe, or memory. What she feels now is infatuation, rebellion. In time, she'll understand that I did this to protect her. "The way you protected her mother?" The words came out before Nora could stop them. Her father's head snapped toward her. "You tried to protect her too. Kept her close. Made her follow all the rules, and it didn't save her. She died anyway. So what's the point of all these boundaries if they can't actually protect anyone?" The camp held its breath. No one spoke to Gideon Nash like that. Not even his children. For a long moment, he just stared at Nora. Then he turned back to Royce. "Get off your horse." Royce dismounted slowly, kept his hands visible. 2 warriors moved forward and took his weapons, the revolver, the rifle, a knife from his boot. They stepped back, leaving him standing alone and unarmed in the center of the camp. Gideon circled him like a predator studying prey. "You know what we do to settlers who steal our women? I'm not stealing anyone. She's choosing to come with me. She's not old enough to make that choice. She's old enough to know what she wants." Royce's voice remained steady, despite being surrounded by armed men who wanted him dead. "And what she wants is a life where she's not controlled by fear, where she can make her own decisions, where she can love who she chooses without permission." Thorne stepped forward from the crowd. "Father, this is pointless. He's a trespasser. Our law is clear. Either execute him or exile him. But don't let him stand there and preach about freedom while he's trying to take your daughter." Gideon raised a hand for silence. He was still studying Royce, looking for something. "You came here alone. No backup. No plan beyond riding into a camp full of people who want you dead." He shook his head slowly. "Either you're the bravest man I've ever met, or the stupidest. Maybe both." Royce glanced at Nora again. "But I made her a promise, and I keep my promises. Even if it kills you? Especially then." Something shifted in Gideon's face. A crack in the stone. He turned to look at Nora. Really look at her. And she saw recognition there. Saw him remembering another woman who'd made impossible choices for love. His wife, Nora's mother, who'd chosen to marry a man from a different band, against her own family's wishes. Who'd fought for that choice even when it meant exile from everyone she'd known. Gideon had been that man. Had been the one standing in a hostile camp asking permission to take a woman who loved him. The parallel was too clear to ignore. "Untie her," he said quietly. The warriors looked confused. Thorne stepped forward. "Father, I said untie her." Gideon's voice was sharp now. Someone cut the ropes binding Nora to the post. She stumbled forward, her hands numb from being tied for hours. Royce moved toward her, but warriors blocked his path. Gideon held up a hand. "Not yet. I'm not finished." He looked between them, his expression unreadable. "You want my daughter. You want to take her from her people, her home, everything she's ever known. Fine. But you'll earn that right. You'll prove you're worthy of the choice she's making." "How?" Royce asked. Gideon pulled the knife from his belt. The long blade caught the firelight. "Fight me. Hand to hand. No weapons. If you win, you leave with her. I won't stop you. I'll even give you supplies for the journey." He tossed the knife aside. "If I win, you leave alone. And you never come back, never contact her, never speak her name again." The camp erupted in voices. Some supportive, others shocked. Thorne looked like he wanted to argue but held his tongue. Nora tried to speak, but her father cut her off. "This isn't your decision. This is between men. Between him and me." He turned back to Royce. "So what will it be, Cowboy? Will you fight for her? Or will you prove that everything you said was just words?" Royce looked at Nora one more time. She saw the fear in his eyes, saw him calculating the odds. Gideon was older but hardened by years of war and survival. Royce was younger but exhausted from days of riding with little sleep. This wasn't a fair fight, but it was the only chance they had. He turned back to Gideon and nodded once. "I'll fight." The warriors formed a circle. Royce and Gideon faced each other across 10 feet of fire-lit ground. Nora wanted to scream, wanted to stop this, but she knew she couldn't. This was beyond her now, beyond both of them. This was about two men who'd lived by codes of strength and honor deciding which code was stronger. Her father raised his fists. Royce did the same. And then Gideon attacked. The fight was brutal and short. Gideon moved like a man who'd spent his life in combat, fast and efficient. His first punch caught Royce in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. The second came at his jaw, but Royce ducked, countering with a solid hit to Gideon's midsection. The older man barely flinched. He swept Royce's legs out from under him and the cowboy hit the ground hard. The watching warriors shouted encouragement to their chief. Nora bit down on her fist to keep from screaming. Royce rolled away from a kick aimed at his head and came up swinging. He was younger, fresher, but Gideon knew every dirty trick that kept a man alive in a real fight. They grappled, trading blows that echoed across the camp. Blood ran from Royce's split eyebrow. Gideon's lip was swelling. Neither man slowed down. This wasn't about skill anymore. It was about will. About who wanted victory more. Gideon got Royce in a chokehold from behind. The cowboy's face turned red as he struggled for air. The warriors moved closer, sensing the end. Thorne watched with satisfaction. But Nora saw something else. Saw the way Royce's hand fumbled at his belt. Saw him grab a fistful of sand and throw it backward into Gideon's eyes. Her father released him with a curse, staggering back and clawing at his face. Royce gasped for breath, then charged forward while Gideon was still blind. He tackled the older man, and they both went down. When the dust cleared, Royce had Gideon pinned, one forearm pressed across his throat. "Yield," Royce said through bloody teeth. His voice was raw. "I don't want to hurt you more than I already have. Just yield." Gideon struggled but couldn't break the hold. His eyes watered from the sand. Blood dripped from his nose. He looked past Royce to where Nora stood frozen at the edge of the circle. For a long moment, father and daughter just stared at each other. Then Gideon tapped the ground twice with his open palm. Submission. The camp fell silent. Royce released him immediately and stood up, offering his hand. Gideon ignored it and pushed himself to his feet alone. He wiped blood from his mouth and looked at the cowboy standing in front of him. Looked at the determination still burning in Royce's eyes despite exhaustion and injury. Then he turned to his daughter. "You're certain about this? About him? About leaving everything you've ever known?" Nora stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm certain." Gideon nodded slowly. He looked older suddenly. Tired. "Your mother would have hated me for trying to keep you here against your will. She always said love should be chosen, not commanded." He glanced at Thorne, who stood rigid with disapproval. "I don't expect you to understand, but I remember what it felt like to fight for the woman I loved against people who said it was impossible. I won't be the person who stands in the way of that for my daughter." He walked to where his knife lay in the dirt and picked it up. For one terrible second, Nora thought he'd changed his mind, but he just sheathed the blade and turned back to them. "You have until sunrise to leave. Take what supplies you need from the stores. I'll give you 2 horses and enough food for a week's travel." His expression hardened. "But understand this. You're choosing exile. If you leave tonight, you can never come back. Not for visits, not for reconciliation. You'll be dead to this tribe, dead to me. That's the price of your freedom." The words hit like stones, but Nora had expected them. Known they were coming. "I understand." "Do you?" Gideon's voice cracked. "Do you understand that I'll never see my daughter again? Never know if she's safe or happy or alive? That every day for the rest of my life I'll wonder if I made the right choice letting you go?" Nora crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around her father. He stood stiff for a moment, then his arms came up and held her tight. She felt him shaking. "All right," she whispered against his chest. "I'll find ways to send word. You'll know I'm alive. Don't." His voice was muffled in her hair. "It'll only make it harder. Make a clean break, build a new life. Be happy. That's all I want now." He released her and stepped back, his eyes bright but dry. "Go, before I change my mind." Thorne moved forward from the crowd. Nora tensed, expecting anger. But her brother just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. You always were stubborn, he said quietly, even when we were children. Once you decided something, nothing could change your mind. He glanced at Royce. Take care of her, because if I ever hear that you didn't, I'll find you. And next time there won't be rules or witnesses. Royce met his gaze steadily. You won't hear anything but that she's well, I promise you. Thorne nodded once, then walked away without looking back. Other warriors began dispersing, returning to their tents. The show was over. The decision made. 2 women came forward with supplies, dried meat, water skins, blankets. They loaded everything onto 2 horses that were brought from the corral. Nora changed into traveling clothes and gathered the few personal items she couldn't leave behind. A bracelet her mother had made, a small knife Thorne had given her years ago, a leather-bound journal she'd been writing in since childhood. When everything was ready, she and Royce mounted the horses. The camp was quiet now. Most people had gone to sleep or were pretending to. Only Gideon remained standing by the fire, watching. Nora looked at him one last time, memorized his face, the strong jaw, the gray in his hair, the eyes that held a lifetime of hard choices. Then she turned her horse toward the darkness beyond the camp and rode out without looking back. They traveled through the night, putting miles between themselves and the only home Nora had ever known. By dawn, they'd reached the northern ridge where the desert gave way to grassland. Royce pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted. He helped Nora down, and they stood together watching the sun rise over the territory behind them. Apache land. Her land. Not anymore. Are you sure about this? Royce asked. His face was bruised and swollen, but his eyes were clear. We can still go back. I can face whatever punishment. No. Nora turned away from the view and looked at him instead. I'm where I want to be, with who I want to be with. Everything else we'll figure out together. They rode north for 3 more days, following rivers and avoiding settlements. On the 4th day, they found a valley with good water and shelter, a place unclaimed and unnamed, a place where they could start fresh. They built a simple cabin using timber from the nearby woods, cleared land for a garden, trapped and hunted for food. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others, but they were free to love each other without fear, free to build a life on their own terms. 6 months later, Nora was sitting outside the cabin when she spotted a rider approaching. Her hand went to the rifle beside her, but as the figure got closer, she recognized the horse, recognized the rider. Thorne. He dismounted slowly, hands visible and empty. I'm not here to bring you back, he said. I'm here to tell you Father's sick. He won't last the winter. He asked me to find you, to tell you he forgives you, and that he hopes you're happy. Nora stood frozen. Part of her wanted to ride back immediately, to see her father one more time, to say goodbye properly, but she knew she couldn't. The exile was real. Going back would undo everything they'd fought for. Tell him I am happy. Tell him I found what I was looking for, and tell him I forgive him too. Thorne nodded. He looked at the cabin, at the cleared land, at Royce standing in the doorway with a protective hand on his rifle. You built something good here. Mother would be proud. He mounted his horse. Take care of yourself, sister. Then he rode away, disappearing into the trees. Royce came to stand beside her. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her. Are you all right? I will be. And she meant it, because this was the price they'd chosen to pay. This was what freedom cost when you lived in a world that didn't want you to have it. They'd lost family, and tribe, and home, but they'd gained each other, and standing there in the valley they'd claimed as their own. Watching the sunset over a future they were building with their own hands, Nora knew they'd made the right choice. It wasn't an easy choice. It wasn't a painless one, but it was theirs, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden love and impossible choices in the Wild West, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.